Hello and welcome to The Green Room by Deloitte, an award-winning podcast where we explore the topics that matter most in business. I'm Lizzie Elston and this is episode 71, where we ask, does how we play as children affect our career?
It's an ever more changing world out there, and I think to be ready for that, you can't bank on the functional skills alone.
It was a real call to action. It forces all to go back and think, well, what can we do about it?
90% of your neural connections in your brain are created between the age of 0 to 5. So that is a super crucial time.
Whereas play, of course, it doesn't have to be about that. It can just be for the enjoyment of play.
Hello everyone and welcome back to The Green Room. Today we're talking about the link between our childhood and our career. We'll all have pretended to do lots of things when we were kids, even though we might not have gone on to do those things as a job. Although, slight funny story here, I do have a cassette recording of me, aged 8 years old, recording a radio show. So maybe some of us do go on to do these things. But what we're looking at today is whether the way we played as children sort of affects how we work today. Before we get stuck into that topic, a quick reminder that you can find all 70 plus episodes of The Green Room wherever you found this episode, with topics ranging from tech to climate to the future of work and the importance of inclusion. So back to today. As adults, work and play feel worlds apart, but as kids, playing is our job. So do we need to take play more seriously and better understand the link between those early experiences and our later lives? And we have got two fantastic guests to help us answer these questions. Annie, over to you.
Thanks, Lizzie. Today we're joined by Christian Powell, Vice President and General Manager for the UK and Ireland at Lego Group, and Emma Franklin, a Director here at Deloitte. Welcome to you both.
Great to see you both.
Really
And before we get deep into the conversation, it's probably a good time to mention that you've both been involved in the Royal Foundation Early Years Report. Deloitte and Lego are both members of the Business for Early Childhood Task Force. But to kick us off, let's start with getting a better understanding of the role that play plays in our lives. Lizzie, to your point, at kids, we all want to play, but I think as we grow up, we lose a little bit of that joy and love for play. Although I'll be honest, I still love play. I love games, I love Lego, I love gamification of things that aren't even games at all. What is it about play and why is play so important? Christian, I'll come to you first.
Thank you. So play is never just play. Play is universal and play taps into that natural curiosity, natural energy that kids, but also adults have. And when kids play, they are allowed to explore, to wander, to link experiences, and really make sense of the world around them. We strongly believe, and we've evidence that playing as a kid helps you to develop skills like creativity, build confidence, collaboration, and resilience, which help you really to thrive further in life. And when I look back to my own childhood, I had the privilege really growing up and having that access to play. And I think it has really shaped me to this day. And there's things where, when I think back, I was roaming the garden with my brother or playing with Lego bricks with my brother or other toys, that has really built something, for example, like intrinsic motivation, drive I have myself, that has lasted to this day.
Emma, we're talking about play being so important, and it might not sound very playful to say this, but what makes good play? For example, is it down to the types of toys that we play with? Is it the environment we're in? Is it the people we play with? Is there a distinction between sort of good play and less good play?
I think all of those things play a part in how play can shape us. So we, in the paper that we've done with the Royal Foundation, we've looked at the importance of relationships and experiences in environments. These are three concepts that Harvard have been looking at over the last probably two decades or so. And in reality, all of those things can really kind of shape how kids experience play. I think one of the great things, just picking up on Christian's point about creativity, about play for me, is how open-ended it is, and the fact that there's not necessarily a target. If you think about kids now, especially when they start to go into school, like everything is so geared towards achieving things. There's a kind of specific goal, a specific target. And really kids are kind of getting into that, you know, at the age of 5, and they're kind of going all the way through to sort of 18 and beyond with this real kind of target mindset. Whereas play, of course, it doesn't have to be about that. It can just be for the enjoyment of play, the kind of the recreational aspect of it, and just, you know, kind of experiencing that in a variety of different environments and different relationships, I think can just be so powerful for kids, learning that actually you don't have to have an end goal in mind. You can just enjoy something for the sake of enjoying it.
Totally. It's not just about the skills and everything you gain from it, but just the pure joy of play. I think that's lovely. And Christian, Lego was very recently involved in the International Day of Play, which is now recognised by the UN on the 11th of June. Why do you think it was so important to have a specific day dedicated to play?
So I think you touched on it at the beginning. When we grow older, maybe play doesn't take the front stage. So we strongly believe there needs to be a perception change in the overall society to acknowledge how important play can be. So we've been over the last years working with the UN, and we're super proud that this year is the first year where the International Day of Play, like you said, was adopted. As of from years from now on and years out, we will celebrate the 11th of June every year as the International Day of Play. And on a side note, it's the birthday of my youngest daughter. So what better way to celebrate your birthday than with really like setting time aside to play, downing the tools, the work, and have the whole world play.
Yeah.
Well, and you must have got such bonus points with your daughter. The International Day of Play on her birthday.
I will tell her at some point that was intentional. So.
When you're playing, do you, with your children, are you playing with toys, or are you doing make-believe sort of play, or is it all sorts?
So I think the key piece is that it should be open-ended play, and I think you also touched on it, Emma. And children are incredibly creative. So it could be something like sitting down on the kitchen floor with my 2-year-old daughter and taking a dried box of penne pasta, and she will recreate what she learned in kindergarten. And she'll tell me, and she will involve me in her play. But it's not me directing the play, it's this open play, which we think gives the biggest value. So it could be anything from picking up a stick and a stone to a toy, to a Lego box that can really enable that play. But I think the key investment is time.
It's really funny you mentioned a box, because one of my early memories is with my friends in the garden. We were quite little, we must have been 3 or 4, and we were all just put into a cardboard box, not like it wasn't shut up. Our heads were above the box, but we all pretended we were on a train in our individual boxes. And it's the old adage, isn't it, about, you know, you buy a really fancy, expensive present and then the child wants to play with the box because it's like, oh, a box, I can put things in it. But no, to your point, it's that creativity element, isn't it? It's wonderful to see. And just in terms of, I mean, we're talking a lot about play here and sort of up until the age of 5 more broadly. What else shapes us? What else gets us off to a good start in life?
I mean, we touched a little bit on relationships. I think one of the concepts that I came across as part of the work we were doing with the Royal Foundation was around serve and return, which wasn't a concept I'd come across. Christian, you probably have in your background, but this was a concept that Harvard came up with around describing the kind of engagement between a child and an adult. You know, it could be a caregiver, it could be a key worker, and the idea being that, you know, a child will serve you some sort of interaction. You know, whether that's a kind of facial expression or you know, showing you something. And how you return that as an adult, what you do with that is, you know, it kind of builds a really valuable kind of social connection. It starts to form the sort of the understanding of relationship dynamics at a really young age. And it's something that really resonated with me, because I very much remember being a parent to I've got 3 children. With my first child, I remember, you know, as most, I think, first-time parents do, sort of, you know, showing her books at sort of, you know, 2 weeks old, you know, because you sort of felt like you had to kind of do that kind of thing with them. But actually, serve and return, it's very much more about just be with the child and kind of observe what they're doing and observe how they want to engage and kind of responding to that in a similar sort of way. And I think to the point that Christian was making, it's things like my kids the other day, they were out in the back garden. They spent an hour and a half playing with our clothes pegs in the back garden. Yeah. And they came up with so many different games around this, and they just kind of wanted me to engage with that game, right? So I was coming out, and the pegs were kids in a nursery, and, you know, they were teaching these kids in a nursery to read. And then I came out and they were garden implements, and, you know, there were all sorts of different things. And kind of just coming out and stepping into their world and kind of engaging with that and playing, being in there with them. I think it's really, really important. And it starts to it starts to kind of create a different kind of language, I think, with children, especially for children at a very young age where they don't have necessarily verbal language, or kids at a later age who also, you know, for whatever reasons, struggle with communicating verbally. It's such a nice dynamic that you can kind of create with them if you just, you know, step into their spaces and kind of be with them in those worlds.
Maybe one thing to build, like, there's a study showing that 90% of your neural connections in your brain are created between the age of 0 to 5. So that is a super crucial time for the development of our kids.
Yes.
And in that period, I think it's super important that kids have a safe and healthy home, access to the necessities around food and hygiene, but also something like play. And that can be restricted by time or financial situations or spaces. But I think the work with the Royal Foundation around early childhood had really opened our eyes also to the wider spectrum of things that kids need between 0 to 5 and how this can massively shape their life.
It's so fascinating, 'cause I think we all intrinsically know that it's important for children to play, but this report has actually put a lot of research into the importance of it, as you've just said, Christian. So I think we'll probably talk about that a bit more.
And not just play, those crucial, you know, pregnancy up to the age of 5, I definitely did not appreciate how formative that period is. We kind of know it anecdotally, but having that kind of stat around it is really powerful.
Yeah.
One of the things that came to mind while you were speaking around like safety and having that environment and having the time is that not all children do have that time. They don't have the empowerment, encouragement, space, time, etc., relationships with those adults to play. And arguably, those most kind of more vulnerable children are the ones that need it the most. What would you say are some of the barriers and challenges to so many children not having that access to play?
I think you partly alluded to it. I think it can be something like financial situation, the space and the time that doesn't allow all caregivers to just spend the time or spend the resourcing to have to play with their kids. And there's a multitude of things that are happening now with the Royal Foundation where we try to change that from multiple angles. That can be from the broader perception to the time that caregivers have, to financial support or just access. For example, we're working with Easy Peasy, a partnership that provides very tailored tools to play. Because sometimes there's also a confidence piece, which is sometimes underestimated, confidence piece in caregivers, that they don't really feel confident how to play with their kid. So I think it's a multitude of things, but I think working on all dimensions will really help us to change that.
Sort of looking at the factors throughout our lives as we grow, obviously we've talked a bit about the importance of play, and well-being is part of that. What do you think is the impact on our overall well-being, you know, even as we're going out into adulthood from playing as a child? And then what's the effect of that on wider society as well?
I mean, as 90% of your brain develops in these early years, I think having that play and creating these skills, what we call the 21st century skills around collaboration, resilience, it's an ever more changing world out there. And I think to be ready for that, you can't like bank on the functional skills alone. So these soft skills or 21st century skills are just fundamental to unlock your future potential and for our kids to be successful. So we have a multitude of studies showing how important play is to develop these skills. And I think the interesting piece now with the work from the Royal Foundation and Deloitte and the business task force was to bring this together and even quantify what can be effects for our kids, for our adults, but also for the broader society.
Yeah, and I think we had a really interesting case study, didn't we, albeit an inadvertent one through COVID, of the sort of the impact of removing some of those touch points, those relationships, and those, you know, the kind of the networking opportunities that kids had. I don't know how old your kids are, Christian. My eldest was in reception when she was in COVID, and when we were in COVID, and I think she had like a term and a half of reception, and then she came out. We were in lockdown, I was pregnant with our third at the time, and by the time she went back into school, you know, a lot of those kids they'd regressed in quite a big way. So some of them, you know, were no longer toilet trained when they went back to school, and kind of had lost, I think, some of those abilities to make those connections and relationships and that kind of thing, and they had to kind of relearn some of that in the school setting. And it was kind of a horrible time, but also kind of fascinating from an early years perspective and a later years perspective to recognise actually how important, you know, having those experiences and, you know, it can really be. I think in particular in relation to how important these sort of skills are at an early stage, as part of the paper that we developed, we estimated that if we got it right for early years, if as a society we really focused on early years, and if businesses could really lean into this, we'd be looking at around £45.5 billion value added back into the UK economy, which is, you know, it's immense. £45.5 billion just by getting it better for that kind of 0 to 5s. And a big element of that, I think it's about 12 billion of that, was entirely focused on what Christian's just touched on, is about if we had more of a focus on developing those social and emotional skills at an early age, building that resilience, building that collaboration, that problem solving, those networking, relationship dynamics, we could see, you know, sort of 12 billion value added back in by, you know, kind of removing some of the challenges that people have in later life when they start to enter the workforce.
Yeah. And this report has been supported by a business task force, as Annie, you mentioned it in the introduction. So just in terms of what we're seeing the role of businesses in all of this, because we've talked about, you know, family and caregivers, but wider society presumably has a role to play here as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think one of the Princess of Wales was the one who, you know, it's her mission, you know, to kind of create a healthy, happy society for all, but with a particular focus on getting it right in that sort of 0 to 5 year age group. And she convened the business task force just over a year ago, and I think really sort of set businesses a challenge, right, in terms of saying this is hugely important, and I think businesses should be at the table. You know, what can you guys do about it? It was a real call to action. It forces all to go back and think, well, you know, what can we do about it? What should our role be in that? And what we identified really is that there are almost kind of 3 touch points that businesses have. So we have the touch point with our workforce. You know, we employ a huge number of kind of parents and caregivers ourselves, so how are we supporting them? But we're providers of goods and services, so we have customers, we have clients, we do very different things with very different groups of people, but we are touching a huge number of, you know, of people across the UK, across the globe in some cases. And then we're also community members ourselves, right? So we are based in cities, in towns, you know, across the country, across the world, and what are we doing in those particular areas? And actually when we started thinking around those 3 touch points, it starts to become much clearer about actually what, you know, how many different platforms we have and how influential we could be if we were bringing a real voice to this. And that was ultimately, I think, the kind of the initial goal of the task force really was to bring a voice to this and actually start to surface how important this is and how important it is that everybody thinks about the role that they play, not just, you know, kind of the sort of the organisations that typically, historically have been in this space.
I find that really fascinating because, Lego aside, I would say that, you know, early years childhood is not something necessarily that a lot of businesses, including Deloitte, have historically been that active in, but having that call to action and saying, to your point, everyone's got a role to play. Think about all of the touch points, how many parents, caregivers, family members we touch and have access to. It's everyone can play their part and have responsibility, which I really, really like, especially as in that report there was a stat around 59%, 60% of parents or caregivers leave work or have considered leaving work due to well-being and, you know, mental health. I find that staggering. And it goes to your question earlier around well-being and how important it is and how businesses, even though people might not make that link, how important it is for them to play that role.
Yeah.
Again, as the Lego Group, as a global brand, we feel even more of a responsibility to lean into this. So we were just honored and excited to be part of that task force. And we're also really proud that there's some very concrete things coming out of it. So one is a perception change in society, which I think is needed to put it on the radar, but then also to just get things going. So as 2 examples, we are donating 3,000 Lego boxes to nurseries across the UK, and we are creating learnings and trainings for all nurseries as access to for caregivers to access around social emotional development. And these are Lego boxes that come from the Lego education background, so they are boxes which help you in a nursery setting to work with kids around emotions and learnings.
Wonderful.
And that's just the first step. We're also engaging with a multitude of partners around the Power of Play initiative in Tower Hamlets in London, wanting to reach 15,000 kids who don't have access to play, who maybe don't have that privilege of space and time from caregivers. So there's a lot also very concretely happening across all task force members. But we want to get this snowball rolling of other businesses joining now.
Yes.
So the more the merrier, basically. So yes, 8 task force members can kick this off, but it needs to be everyone to lean in.
And I guess the idea then is that the business, I mean, with Lego, of course, you've got a direct line to children with toys and helping them to play. I suppose other businesses, it's more about supporting the workforce in order that they support their children. Is that sort of how it is? Or?
Kind of is, but again, I think the great thing about this is the more that we sort of explored it as a task force, the more we were looking at those sort of different touch points and thinking actually there's lots of different ways that I don't think we necessarily would have come up with on our own, but actually just having the conversation as a sort of wider task force. So as part of the paper, we came up with what we called 5 game changers as to what we thought businesses of all sizes, all shapes, all makeups, you know, small and mediums, large corporates, that could kind of do different things around sort of 5 main areas. So the first one, and Christian's alluded to it, is transforming the culture, which is in effect is starting this conversation. It's getting people talking about it and recognising actually this is really important and we should be doing more around it. But some of the other areas as well, so there is one around the workforce specifically, and kind of again we can all do different things with our workforce supporting them. But there's a third one around supporting parents and carers access the basic support and essentials they need. So going back to kind of Christian's point earlier, you know, we're working, one of our clients at the moment is a small charity who provides beds to particularly women and children who've come out of abusive situations, and they're moving into accommodation and they have no beds, they have no clothes, they have no food. And you know, we're talking about play here, but there's a real urgent need to kind of address some of those things first, and kind of almost think about Maslow's hierarchy as part of that. So there's a third game changer around that. Co-op task force member doing some amazing stuff in some parts of the UK about ensuring that some of those families are getting access to some of the food from the co-op shops, and you know, and kind of making sure that some of those basic needs are taken care of. And then the other 2 game changers, there's one around kind of nurturing the social and emotional skills, and Lego's emotions set is just such a great example of that, and getting kids talking about emotions at an early age and making that a much more normal part of kind of the conversations. And then the 5th one is looking at access to quality, reliable and affordable childcare, and I'm emphasising all 3 of those points because I feel like it's really hard to get all 3 of those points. This is obviously it's a big political play at the moment, but there's things that again our fellow task force members are looking at, particularly around that. So NatWest looking at how they can provide loans to new childcare companies, and Aviva looking at how they can support with the insurance around that. So there's kind of the workforce one, I think, is almost like the central one, that everybody could do something around the workforce. But actually, when you look at the other 4 game changers as well, there's different things that we can be more creative about. From a Deloitte perspective, we are using our partnership with Teach First, and we're now supporting Teach First to develop a qualification around early years practitioners particularly. So going into that quality childcare point, making sure that leaders of the future in a childcare sector are kind of equipped with what they need, and starting to bring in things around play and kind of how important that is as well.
Did you know, at Deloitte, we buy goods and services from social enterprises, which contributes to our 5 Million Futures programme. From Babies with Love sells beautiful gifts for babies and gives the profits to orphaned and abandoned children around the world. Their ethically sourced designs help vulnerable children to grow up in safe, happy places. Do you know someone who is expecting? Why not treat them with a gift from FromBabiesWithLove.org. Now, back to our topic of the day.
You know, we're talking about these obvious benefits, but that economic incentive as well that you mentioned earlier. I mean, 45.5 billion. That is a staggering amount. But if we get this right, I mean, it's really inspiring, isn't it, that we could not just support, you know, the children, the future generation, and their families and caregivers, but also boost the economy in the process. It's a kind of a
I was thinking that when you were listing off all of those skills, lifelong learning, creativity, making connections. These are all adult skills as well that have a real impact on whether or not someone thrives or not in the workplace. So I really like that link as well. And I was involved very recently in a Lego Serious Play workshop, and I loved it. It was one of the best things I've ever done at work, and it makes me sad sometimes that the seriousness of play or the benefits of play are sometimes forgotten about. It's, it can be misconstrued as like a childish thing that's, it's not for adults. Adults go over here and kids play over there, but it's so much more than that. And I just
don't tell my husband that.
Yeah.
Fan of Lego. But yeah, you're right. The Lego Serious Play, and Christian, it's fantastic. I've been involved in the workshop as well, and I have to be really honest. I was a little bit sceptical at the start, like a group of sort of corporate, professional adults sitting in a room. Normally, that's not the way we do things. And the Lego came out, and suddenly everyone gets into their flow, and you're there back in the world of almost being a child again. And it's about sort of using this wonderful tool to express yourself and to think about your role in business. So yeah, if anyone is listening and wants to know more, it's definitely a good thing to look into.
But maybe to build, I think play is not just for kids. So our mission is to inspire and develop the builders of tomorrow. Yeah. And that can be kids, but it can also still be adults.
Yes.
And also throughout pandemic, we learned that we call it joyful focus, is something adults really did embrace.
Yes.
They opened the Lego box, they played, they had time to reset their day and just relax. And it's something that also in the corporate world can be quite insightful to say, once you have bricks in your hands, your thinking changes. You play and you maybe access different areas of your brain to look at a problem, not from the PowerPoint or a spreadsheet, which you normally would do, but with bricks in your hand playing, that can unlock that creativity across all age groups.
Yeah, and it's so satisfying as well.
And I feel like on an individual level, but also with relationships as well. I feel like our husbands are quite similar, because my husband, one of his favourite things to do, if you asked him what's the favourite pastime that we do together, it's Lego. It's something, it's some kind of building or some kind of play, some kind of gamification together. And you just end up having conversations, changing your thinking in a way that we would never do if we were kind of sat face to face, not doing anything else with our hand, nothing tactile. It's really wonderful.
But I guess I think the same is also true, sort of the interaction between parents and kids as well, right? So I would say, not saying this isn't necessarily a kind of common thing, but in our household, I'm definitely the kind of the creative, imaginary play type personality. So I'm the one that the kids will come to for that. But my husband is he absolutely adores Lego, to the extent that I've now started buying him his own Lego sets for Christmas.
Yeah, same.
But but it's interesting. I will. I promise. I promise. But the extent to which I've seen him then engage in conversations with our 9-year-old daughter, going on like 15, it's interesting as their relationship has changed, that this is now something that they can sit down to, they can do together, they can engage in those kind of conversations, as you say, they're not necessarily the conversations that you would ever have face to face over a dinner table, but when you're side by side and you've got something to kind of engage in together, those dynamics do start to change. And I think it's been a really fascinating seeing that, and it also put me in mind of my own father. We didn't have Lego when I was a kid, Christian, but we did have Meccano, which was like a really big thing for my dad. And I remember he wasn't a hands-on dad particularly. He didn't tend to sort of play, but Meccano, he'd be there on the floor with me doing the kind of the Meccano and stuff. And I think it's such a great way of kind of allowing people who maybe who interact differently or think differently to kind of engage in some of those conversations and relationships that maybe they otherwise wouldn't without the tool of that kind of play.
Absolutely. And even if you don't have children, I'm sure you have families or relatives with children, and it's such a wonderful thing to be able to kind of go back into your own childhood almost, isn't it, and engage in it.
Gives you permission, doesn't it, to do that?
It does. No, I think I was joking earlier that I think the only reason that my husband wanted children was so that we could play Lego with them. So let's talk a little bit more about some of the barriers that there are to play, and we've explored, Emma, talking about access to some basic necessities, but of course it's not just those who might be in desperate need of some of those necessities, but also actually working people with their children at home. You want to engage in play. I believe, Christian, there's a statistic that says 91% of parents say play is important, but when it actually then comes to choosing things for their children, it's all achievement based. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yes.
And the role that we are all guilty of, perhaps?
So one key barrier to play is time.
Yeah.
And we all lead very busy lives, but so do our kids. And when you think about time in school, homework, after school, extracurricular activities, sports, other things, there's very little time left basically in the day.
Yep.
And to your stat, yes, I mean, parents acknowledge that play is important, but when it comes to choosing what they, together with their kids, put into the week or in the weekend, 70% is achievement-based activities. This could be sports, this could be music, so something that is quite targeted. And then I think we touched on it very early, this like unstructured free play, there's hardly time for it in these busy calendars.
I mean, this talks to me personally, because I have a 12-year-old, he's at senior school now, but even through those early years in primary school, you feel like you're trying to keep up because the friend is off doing harp lessons or fencing lessons. I mean, I'm exaggerating, but there are all these things, and Monday night is this, and Tuesday night is that, and Wednesday night is this. And I remember, thinking, hang on a minute, when I was a child, I had piano lessons and brownies, and that was it. And everything else, there was play. And surely we just need to address the balance a little bit, I think, sometimes with all of these achievements that we're trying to get our children to play with.
I could not agree more. And I think sometimes kids need to be a tad bored to then unlock their creativity, because if they're non-stop active, probably that creativity, that resilience, that collaboration gets a bit drowned in all the activities they're engaging in.
Yes.
So 2 personal examples that we do is, for example, my oldest gets up early, he's up at 6 while the rest of the family sleeps. And then we just spend that first half an hour playing.
Lovely.
But I let him guide what we do. And then the second thing we do is we actively try to keep one of the weekend days free, because with all the sports going on, it's very easy to also have your weekend as a fully packed, stacked agenda for the kids. And then sometimes the kids even say, "Dad, do we have a day where we can just do what we want?" So we get up, have breakfast, and then they lead, they play. And just seeing how they embrace that is something that encourages us to do even more of that.
Yes. Yeah, making time, so important.
There's definitely something about almost addressing, I think what you're saying there, Lizzie, is about addressing that kind of parental guilt about, I have to keep my kids occupied, I have to do, useful, productive activities. But I guess the issue with that as well is that if you're doing that, that means that you're doing all the thinking for the kids, right? To your point, Kristen, I think being bored is such a fantastic thing, because when you're bored, as adults are, that's when you come up with kind of new ideas and inspiration, all the rest of it. And I think as parents, if we are kind of scheduling the week out to the nth degree, we're not allowing kids to kind of to come up with their own ideas and to come up with their own sort of activities and that kind of thing. And we're kind of similar, Christian. We've kind of, apart from sort of kids' parties, we don't really do any structured activities at the weekend because we're tired as parents, right? We need some time just to kind of to sort of settle, but also just time to kind of enjoy being with each other and be guided by the kids and the activities that they want to do, whether that's going out for a walk or whether that's picking up a jigsaw or whatever it might be.
Yeah, because it goes so quickly. That's simple, isn't it? I mean, it all goes so fast.
I think that point around being bored really resonated with me, although I feel like a lot of us, including myself, and I'm sure many listeners, are guilty of, you've got a free moment of boredom or nothing in the calendar or schedule, you turn to technology, you turn to your phone, you turn to screen time. And I know there's a lot of debate around kids and screen time, but I'd be interested to know your thoughts on the role that technology and digital has played when it comes to play.
So essentially, we believe there's no bad play. So there is play in the digital space that can foster kids' creativity. But in the end, it's all in terms of what's the measure, what's the amount of time you spend with different stimuli, with different things that help you to develop. So I think if that obviously comes the one dominating thing, I think then maybe there's a miss on the free play, on the creativity, because the digital play is to some degree also more guided. But there's also, say, when you take certain digital games, there's also free spaces to create and to be creative. So I think there's not a good or bad necessarily. It's more the balance of things that kids get exposed to and that they can express themselves in.
And I think my concern is that technology and screen time is kind of skewing the balance a little bit for myself, maybe others as well, because like I have a lot of board games at home, and it's a lot more common now, I would say, amongst my age group to have a lot of board games. But there was a period of time where I thought I was really strange and a bit of a loser for basically running a board game cafe out of my house. But I think that's right. It's all about balance. And one thing that I find with more video and tech games is they are kind of more achievement focused. There's levels you're trying to, you keep going, they keep you playing, whereas that kind of free play or unstructured play has a lot more freedom to kind of, there not necessarily be an end, or you can change it and make up your own rules, which I really like as well.
I think it's also, I agree with balance, where balance was the word that was in my head. I think it's also about how you engage with people around it as well. And I was reflecting, so our kids we don't actually have time for TV during the week. It wasn't a kind of conscious decision, but it's just, we are so busy, we don't have the TV on all during the week for the kids. But I have a 3-year-old who's absolutely obsessed with Paw Patrol, which I suspect is going to be resonant with a lot of people. Yep. And at the weekends they get whatever, a couple of hours of TV, and Paw Patrol is like on non-stop. But we've also bought him a set of the pups and the Paw Patrol tower and all the rest of it. And kind of similarly to what you were saying, Christian, I mean, mine's up at 5, so 6 I think you're doing pretty well. Mine is up really early. And actually
so glad to be through that phase.
I can only dream. But he has the set in his bedroom, and he's now in a stage where he'll get himself up. He usually comes down, says morning, goes to the toilet, whatever, and then goes back, and I can hear him playing with the pups by himself. And he's kind of recreating all of these kind of things. And my older 2 girls, they'll go in and play with him. We'll go and talk to him about, what's Marshall doing, what's Ryder doing, that kind of thing. And I think having that balance where, this sort of screen, we are in the age of screens, we can't avoid it, we've just got to work out how to get the balance. And I think the balance is partly about accepting it as part of kind of everyday life, but engaging with it and kind of making it a learning thing, making it a point of kind of connection between you, and using that to sort of stimulate some of that inspiration. Some fantastic games have come out of those sorts of TV programmes for that age group.
Absolutely, yeah. Similar. Thomas the Tank Engine was a fantastic inspiration for playing with my little one when he was little, and recreating the stories in the books using the actual toys themselves. So feels like we're going to start to sort of wrap up the conversation. As we do that, let's think about what we can all be doing. So there's bound to be parents tuning into this, as well as other caregivers and family members. What's one piece of advice that you would give them when it comes to play?
I think my piece of advice would be to be deliberate about play, to have this as something where that doesn't happen by accident or happens in the time that is left in the week, but a bit like nearly schedule, it sounds a bit odd because we talk about unstructured free play, but nearly schedule the time for yourself and for your kids to allow for that freedom and that space. And I think it will be, you will be amazed of what comes out of it. And maybe this feeling of, say, I need to foster my kids' development and all of that is great, but I think giving that just free space will do so much for kids' development that at least it's worth a try.
Absolutely. Thank you. Emma?
I would say there is no right or wrong way to play, actually. I think particularly as a parent, I think you're just beset on all sides with so much stuff that you should or shouldn't be doing, and it's so easy to kind of beat yourself up or kind of get overly hung up on the kinds of things that you should be doing and how you should use your free time. But actually, we've talked in this conversation, I'm sure we've got millions of examples of how you don't need loads and loads of stuff to play, and the kind of the benefits that brings. And I think don't beat yourself up as a parent or caregiver. Just kind of go with the flow, go with what the kids want to interact with, and and talk about it. I think as much as anything, like, let's talk about it. Let's get play on the agenda. Let's make sure that more people understand how important it is for all age levels.
So, final question will bring us back to the topic of the day. In one sentence or two, I know it's going to be hard, but in a succinct as possible, the big question: does how we play as children affect our career?
The answer is yes. I think it massively does. And having play early in your childhood allows you to build those skills that in an ever more changing world, I think will grow ever more important. So prioritizing play early is going to benefit our kids for the rest of their life.
I can't disagree with that. That's 100% yes from me. I mean, for all those reasons, but I think building those skills in early childhood is really important, but also fostering those kind of relationships and dynamics between parents and caregivers and their children, as they're part of our workforce, making sure that we're, giving them the time to engage with their kids in play is just hugely important for all of us as businesses, but also as society as well.
Wonderful. Emma and Christian, thank you so much for joining us. I'm off to play with my Lego set. And,
As am I.
thanks
you
very
so
much
much.
for joining us today.
Thank
Really
you.
great.
Our pleasure.
Appreciate it. Thanks for listening to this episode of The Green Room by Deloitte. We release a new episode every other Tuesday with another big question. So don't forget to hit follow or subscribe to this podcast wherever you're listening or watching. That way you'll be alerted whenever a new episode drops. This podcast is produced by our very own Pod Squad and hosted by Lizzie Elston, Ethan Worth and Annie Wong. Original music by Ali Barrett.